I first noticed Evan the way one notices a heavy winter hanging over an early spring street, quiet but everywhere. He lived across the hall, a man in his early 40s whose shirts tried to hide a tired belly and whose eyes often searched the ground, as if answers had fallen there and shattered. Most evenings he arrived late, carrying takeout and the kind of silence that lingers after a door closes too hard. I was retired, already used to slow mornings and the small rituals that stitch a day together. We would pass and nod. That was all. What I remember most was the stillness around him. Not rest, but a kind of pause that had overstayed its welcome. His breath was short after stares. His laugh, what little I heard, sounded like it had to squeeze past a knot in his chest. I had walked the neighborhood for years, mapping every crack in the sidewalks, counting the seasons by the color of the sycamores. One morning, as the sky held the soft gray of early light, I found him at the mailboxes, hesitating like someone at a shoreline. I told him I walked every morning and that 5 minutes outside could loosen a day that felt stuck. He looked as though the idea were both too small to matter and somehow too big to try. I could see the math of shame on his face, the way he added up old failures and subtracted hope before the day had even begun. So I kept it small, just to the corner and back. I said in my mind, and then I waited. He came. He moved at the pace of a careful metronome, not fast enough to chase breath away, not slow enough to return to the couch. The street smelled of wet grass and coffee. Sprinklers whispered. A dog announced us with a thump of tail against a fence. His steps were short and uncertain, as if the pavement might reject him, but the body remembers. After the first minute, his shoulders lowered. After the second, he lifted his eyes. At 5 minutes we stopped. The world had not changed, yet it had. His face carried a thin ribbon of color, the way dawn draws a line on the horizon, to say, keep going. We stood there, two neighbors in the small clarity that follows, choosing. A door had opened, not loudly, but enough. The days that followed were uneven, like a child learning to balance on uncertain legs. Some mornings Evan appeared at the door with a quiet nod, shoes loosely tied, still carrying the weight of hesitation. Other mornings, I could hear the muffled clatter of dishes inside his apartment, but the door never opened. I did not knock. Change cannot be dragged out. It must be chosen, even if reluctantly. But when he came, there was something different in him, subtle at first. He began to notice things. The creak of the old oak tree at the corner, the scent of rain before it arrived, the joggers who passed by with their steady rhythm. He once said, almost to himself, that he wondered what it might feel like to move like them. Not for speed, but for freedom. I heard the question hidden beneath his words. 5 minutes became 10. 10 minutes stretched to 15. We reached the park one morning, where benches stood, waiting, like old friends. He sat briefly, breath heavy, but there was no bitterness in his eyes. Instead, he looked at the winding path that circled the lake, and asked if one day he could make it all the way round. His voice trembled, not with weakness, but with the fragile hope of someone daring to believe. The first time he tried to jog, it lasted less than 30 seconds. His face flushed, his breath ragged, his body reminding him of the years it had carried too much. He stopped, frustrated. But I told him that a spark does not need to be a fire to be real. The next day, he tried again, and again. The seconds slowly gathered like drops of water forming a stream. Seasons shifted around us. The sycamores that once dropped, leaves now unfolded green. Then summer's heat pressed on his back, and still, he walked. By autumn, his steps carried a lightness I had never seen in him before. He no longer counted minutes. He counted distance. He no longer looked down. He looked ahead. One morning, he stood at the trailhead with new running shoes, their white edges still untouched by dirt. He told me he wanted to try a mile. His voice did not ask for permission, only witness. I walked behind as he moved forward, each stride uneven but determined. When he reached the end, chest heaving, he lifted both arms as if he had already touched something greater than distance. For the first time, I saw pride replacing shame on his face. The path had stretched further, but so had he. Years slipped by quietly, like pages turning in a book you don't realize you've almost finished. The man who once struggled to reach the corner now woke before sunrise, lacing shoes with a steady rhythm that spoke of habit, not struggle. Evan had become a runner, not the fastest, not the strongest, but a man who could meet the road without fear. His body was leaner, yes, But more than that, his spirit carried a light that I had never seen in those early days of silence and self-doubt. He told me once that what he loved most was not the finish line, but the sound of his own footsteps, steady and alive, reminding him of how far he had come. The marathons he ran were not battles against others, but conversations with himself. Each mile whispered back to that man who had barely managed 5 minutes, saying, "Look at you now." On the day of his first official marathon, I stood among the crowd. The morning air filled with nervous chatter, the clatter of water bottles, the rustle of racing bibs. Evan's eyes found mine just before the start. No words passed, only a quiet smile that carried the weight of years. The gun fired, and thousands surged forward, a river of determination flowing through the streets. The hours stretched long, runners fell back, others pressed forward. I waited at the finish line, the way one waits for spring after a long winter. And then, there he was, his stride uneven, his face drawn with exhaustion, yet his eyes locked on the line that once seemed impossible. He crossed it, not with a burst of speed, but with a quiet steadiness, arms lifting, mouth breaking into a trembling smile. I felt the sting of tears, not just for him but for every quiet soul who wonders if small steps could ever matter. Afterward, sitting on the curb with the medal heavy around his neck, Evan told me that nothing about the marathon was easy, but the hardest part had always been opening his door that very first morning. He said he realized now that transformation doesn't demand grand beginnings, only the courage to start. I thought of the corner where we once stopped, breathless after 5 minutes, and I understood. The finish line was never about 26 miles. It was about the countless, ordinary steps that built a new life, one after another, until he no longer measured distance in miles, but in belief. So if you feel stuck, waiting for the perfect moment, remember Evan, begin where you are, even if it is only a few steps forward, because small steps create big transformations, and the path you long for may already be waiting beneath your feet. If this story touched you, take a moment to like, share, and leave your thoughts in the comments. And if you'd like more stories that inspire reflection and hope, consider subscribing to True North Stories, where every tale reminds us of the quiet power within ordinary lives.